Hello all. This presentation comes as an update to the final deliverables our group is undertaking this quarter in the Data Science Clinic, serving under the University of Chicago's Data Science Institute, titling this project the Argonne Operations Digital Twin. Our team is comprised of Vincent and Andrew, who are returning members this quarter, while Isaac and I have been new members this quarter. YJ Cho and Bill Trock are our internal mentors, with Victor Perez serving as our TA. Our organizational partner is the Argonne National Laboratory, which serves as a subsidiary of the U.S. Department of Energy, with Matthew T. Durig serving as our external mentor. Our main data science problem we've been approaching is using AI methods to identify relationships between informationally dense documents, such as lab policies, contracts, or legal documents. So speaking more specifically, realizing that Argonne has this expanded collection of differently formatted and written documents, it makes important information difficult to find. And as a consequence, there is an increased risk of falling out of date with mandates required by the Department of Energy. So our specific solution this quarter has been leveraging and utilizing AI methods, in particular large language models, to facilitate the construction of knowledge base, as well as installing a user query system that's able to cite relevant pieces of information in regards to specific user queries, as well as potentially being able to offer summarizations of these cited documents.
To address the issues that Nathan just introduced to us, we have constructed a pipeline that aims to accelerate this process of internal knowledge retrieval by leveraging various AI technologies throughout the pipeline. I'll quickly walk us through this diagram, which provides a high-level overview of the full pipeline, making sure to touch on each of the most critical components. So first, we have the construction of this rich, centralized database that stores all of our document segments, as well as the important underlying relationships between them. The conversion of raw documents into an easily parsable virtual database entails the use of a computer vision model for segmentation, which Andrew will cover in more detail in a few slides. So once we have this central database, the next step of our pipeline deals with the handling of a user query to effectively locate relevant segments of text from the database, a process that Isaac will then elaborate on later in the presentation. The step that follows is then passing the user query and the extracted context through an internal LLM, which can then generate a coherent response to the user query that is heavily grounded in factual Argonne-specific knowledge.
To clarify how our pipeline works, here's an example. We start with a question input by the user. In this case, when do I make my annual report? We collapse that question down into an embedding, which is a long list of numbers that represents the content of that question. Now, we've already collapsed all the information this user wants to retrieve into similar embeddings. So we can take the embedding generated by the user and compare it in this large database of all the embeddings that we already have. We pull out the two that are most similar according to a similarity metric like cosine similarity. And then we can use that piece that's most similar and reindex that back into our knowledge graph, which is pre-constructed. We can pull all the nodes that are connected to that piece and pass them together as context to a large language model, which can use that context to generate a normal response. For instance, for when do I make my annual report, it would say October 1st. In order for many of the similarity and relevance metrics present in our pipeline to work, we need to work with similarly structured pieces of text. Now, extracting these similarly structured pieces of text from documents is not a trivial task. Originally, in our pipeline, we were just working with a single document, the prime document, which states rules and regulations that Argonne is required to follow. And we had gone through this manually, and using natural language processing techniques, we had pulled out pieces of text according to the specific layout of the prime document. However, we need to generalize our pipeline. And one step of that is making sure that we can put in any sort of document. Our solution to this has been to use a computer vision model instead of this manual parsing. A computer vision model can find different pieces of the text, paragraphs, tables, things that we would recognize as being together, and pull those out. We then collapse those down into embeddings and store them into a vector database.
As a part of the eventual implementation of this technology, The Argonne corpus will upload hundreds of separate documents into a segmentation pipeline. While the return-sided text captures relevant contextual information in response to user query, there's also potential benefit in offering users summaries of the documents from which information is cited. This feature would allow users to grasp the broad strokes of what the documents outline and discuss if they so wish. In this consideration, uploaded documents that undergo the segmentation pipeline will also pass through a separate summarization process. These documents will be fed into a large language model that has been fine-tuned in law and billing text, enabling them to summarize large amounts of information effectively. This summarization process will aid users in exploring the composed documents that construct the knowledge base, making it an integral part of the retrieval augmented generation system. By doing so, we can enhance the user's ability to navigate and understand the information landscape, providing a more comprehensive and efficient knowledge retrieval experience.
A central challenge that we've been working to address this quarter is retrieving more relevant document segments instead of just semantically similar document segments when running our query retrieval pipeline. So if I were to ask, when does the contract expire? A semantically similar retrieval would be upon expiration of this contract, the contracting officer may draft a new contract with different terms. This is semantically similar to the query, but it's not relevant because it doesn't access the information that we actually want, which is when does the contract expire? A relevant retrieval would be this contract expires on October 31st, 2026. To help address this relevance and similarity issue, we've instituted what are called hypothetical document embeddings in our pipeline. I'll walk through an example of what this means so that it's more clear. So if I were to ask who can approve changes to the contract, instead of directly comparing this query to our document base, we instead have a large language model generate what it thinks a relevant document segment could look like, even though this document segment that is purely hypothetical might not contain the factual information that the real segment would. It contains the same semantic structure so that we can then compare the embeddings from this hypothetical document to the embeddings of our document base to hopefully retrieve relevant information at a higher rate than just comparing the query. So once it retrieves the relevant information, we feed it into a large language model, which is a large language model as a judge mechanism, which Vincent will talk about in a second, to assess whether it's a relevant document. And if this document is relevant, it will feed it into the response large language model that outputs the free language response from the query.
One approach that we have taken to address the issue that Isaac just presented to us is utilizing this concept commonly referred to as LLM as a judge. In our use case, this basically entails iteratively asking an LLM to generate concrete labels for whether our document segment pairs are relevant or not. We ultimately intend to use these labels as a proxy for ground truth labels, which are unattainable given the amount of human effort that will be required. For context, even with our small sample of Argonne documents, we would have to label hundreds of thousands of document pairs. This quarter, we utilized the DSI cluster to run a job prompting an open source and locally deployed LLM to generate a sample of approximately 10,000 pair labels, of which the results were bleak for cosine similarity, as demonstrated by this ROC curve that visualizes the subpar predictive power of cosine similarity for relevance. And hopefully these results can serve as evidence to prompt further investigation into alternative measures of relevance in future iterations of this project.
In terms of the next steps for this project, we would like to first continue to optimize the data segmentation process that Andrew talked about with the computer vision pipeline so that our segments more closely reflect the structure that's actually built into the PDF documents that we work with. Secondly, we'd like to continue to implement new similarity and relevance measures so that we can continue to retrieve more relevant segments in our query pipeline than just semantically similar segments, as I spoke about before. Lastly, we would like to integrate with updated large language model frameworks. We are continuously updating the large language models we use throughout our pipeline. And as new ones come out, the quality of their outputs gets even better, which will improve the quality of our overall pipeline. So continue to stay update with these is very important. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation.